It's time for another episode of Corner of the Galaxy from the Box, the show that gets you behind the scenes of the LA Galaxy and into the minds of soccer reporters and MLS experts. Your hosts for the day are Corner of the Galaxy's Josh Guesman and LA Times soccer reporter Kevin Baxter. Let's start the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Corner of the Galaxy from the Box on cornerofthegalaxy.com, coming to you on a Monday, November 30th. LA Galaxy making some roster announcements today, so it's certainly one of the top things on our list we're going to talk about, but there's also some U.S. men's national team call-ups that include 3 LA Galaxy players, some interesting matchups in the MLS playoffs. Yes, I know, I'm sure you all thought that the soccer was over this year, but MLS continues to play, and because of that, some interesting matchups that have a whole bunch of LA Galaxy ties in there. So we have a very busy schedule as we come back after Thanksgiving, and to help me do all that is the panda himself, Mr. Kevin Baxter. Kev, how was your Thanksgiving? Everybody good? We
all worked. Everybody had to work. Everybody here had to work. Yep. Yeah. Nothing to be thankful about, really.
You know what? You're healthy. That's something to be thankful for. You know,
yeah.
You're annoying, but you're healthy. So I mean, you know, there's stuff in there. We'll allow it.
That's how you know I'm healthy, when I'm annoying.
Absolutely. So it's this weird sort of off-season time, and I know you and I have been talking throughout the day on this Monday, and we almost didn't get our press release that we were expecting as a deadline came to pass in Major League Soccer. It finally came out at about 4:45 p.m., so a little bit of scrambling there for both of us to do, but we get to talk about it now. We get to talk about a whole bunch of things. I mean, the thing that really kicked off this entire sort of day was the U.S. men's national team call-ups, and usually, we focus not so much on the U.S. men's national team, but on the LA Galaxy players that are going. But in this case, we knew that there were 2 LA Galaxy players in particular that everybody was sort of focusing on going, and we got that information at about, 11 o'clock? 10 o'clock? 10 o'clock today or something like that?
Yeah, it was actually supposed to come out tomorrow, but for whatever reason, U.S. Soccer decided to move it up a day. Apparently, a lot of people felt like Monday was a better day, a better news day to get that out there. I don't know how much thinking they put into that, but yeah, it was when I woke up this morning, one of the first emails I got was, be prepared for the roster dump. It's coming today instead of Tuesday.
Yeah, so it was out there, the pertinent information, and obviously if you're interested, Greg Berhalter put out a 22-man roster for an upcoming match coming up on December 8th?
December 9th at Inter Miami Stadium, and they will allow fans. I think 2,500 fans will be allowed to come to that game.
Yeah, this is a game against El Salvador for the U.S., and the U.S. is fielding a almost entirely MLS-based roster. It's most of the guys who have missed out on the playoffs have been released from their teams and playing in this. The interesting part about this is for the LA Galaxy is that they, along with the Colorado Rapids, have the most representatives on this 22-man roster.
See, there's a good thing about missing the playoffs. That's the upside that everyone misses. You miss the playoffs and you get to go to the national team. By the way, it's 22-man roster right now, but there are 2 Western Conference semifinals to be played this week, which we'll talk about that in a bit, tomorrow and then Thursday. Players that off the losing teams in those 2 games may also be called up, called into camp. In any case, it's just one game. I think the idea is get people into camp. I think that all of the interesting things will happen in training when Greg Berhalter gets a chance to work with some of these players. And another interesting thing, did you know the U.S. national team is undefeated this season?
Well, I mean, limited number of games, so that's the first thing. But they haven't lost. I mean, it makes sense. That's a weird feeling as a U.S. soccer follower to say that, even with a limited number of. Usually it has to be like the first couple of days in January for you to be able to be making that claim.
But this is the fewest number of games. It'll be 4 now. Fewest number of games the U.S. national team has played since, I believe, 1986.
That's not very many. Well, let's get to the Galaxy players who are announced on this. Julian Arago gets the call-up from Greg Berhalter. We'll talk about him. Efrain Alvarez is the interesting one and the one that everybody's sort of focusing on, just because there's a lot of different circumstances that will see him called into camp but not play. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about Sebastian Lletget as well. So we'll start with Lletget, who is one of the older guys on this roster. It's interesting. He also has the chance here, if he plays in the game, which he's probably expected to play with an MLS-based roster. If he plays, will be the only U.S. men's national team player to have played in all 4 games for the United States this year, because you have to remember there was a European-based roster that we all saw, and then Sebastian Lletget, because the LA Galaxy released him basically before the season was over. Not basically, before the season was over. He went and was able to travel and play with that European-based team. So he got to play in those games, and he's going to get to play, or at least be available in this game as well. So Sebastian Lletget sort of has that. But the other two interesting ones are Julian Araujo and Efrain Alvarez. Let's start with Araujo, because Efrain gets to be the more complicated one. But Julian Araujo, Kevin, a chance at actually getting to play on the field this time.
Okay, well, Julian was called up in the January camp, which is also an MLS camp, but did not play and was really disappointed not to play in that February 1st game against Costa Rica. The U.S. won that game 1-0. It wouldn't have cap-tied him to the U.S. anyways, because it was a friendly. To be cap-tied to a team, you need to play in a competitive match. So with the senior national team, it wouldn't have cap-tied him to that. But, the thing with both Araujo and Efrain Alvarez, they are 2 of 4 players called in this camp that are dual nationals that could play for either Mexico or the U.S. The games in Europe, there were actually 12 players that are dual nationals. And what's interesting about this is Mexico for so long has come across the border and taken players, recruited players from the U.S. to, that have Mexican parents that can go play in Mexico. And they've been very successful doing that. Efrain Alvarez is one. He played for U.S. national team U15, played 3 games, and then has played for 3 different Mexican youth national teams. So Greg Berhalter now is letting him know that there's some interest in him playing for the United States, that the U.S. national team is very interested in him. Going back to Julian for just a second, I know Mexico's very interested in him. I talked to their sporting director, Geraldo Tirado, and he told me that they are aware of what he's doing with the Galaxy. They're aware that he is eligible to play for them. He is not cap-tied either. So there is a little bit of a tug-of-war going on with many of these young players, including the 2 Galaxy players. What Greg Berhalter has said is, again, they can't be cap-tied in this game, so nothing can change their status. But what he wants to do is bring these guys in, all the dual nationals, have them look around, see how the U.S. does things, see how the coaching staff works, see how things fit. His goal is not to pressure anyone. He said this is a decision that these players need to make with their families, and we're going to respect those decisions. We're going to get out of the way. But basically they just want to say, look, here's how we do things. Here's how you fit in. Do you like the coaching staff? If you do, if you're interested, let's move these discussions on a little bit. So this is definitely a chance for Efrain to come in. He can't play again, as we talked, but to come in, and Julian as well, come in, kick the tires, talk to the coaching staff, see how they fit. And as you had said when we were talking earlier, both these guys would be eligible to play in the Olympics if there is an Olympics, which is a U23 tournament. They're both age eligible for the Olympics, and that's another reason that the U.S. wants to take a good long look at these guys and maybe get them involved in the program. They're thinking about having them play in Japan.
Yeah, it's interesting. Efrain Alvarez is cap-tied, technically speaking, in a technical sense. He didn't play for the senior Mexican national team, but he did play for the youth Mexican national team in the U17 World Cup, I believe, and that was an official competition. And because of that, if Efrain Alvarez wanted to even play in this USA-El Salvador game, he would have to basically put in his one-time switch, and that one-time switch would then have to be approved. So he's not going to play in this game, Efrain Alvarez. He's going to go, he's going to train with the guys, he's going to sort of see what the U.S. is offering, and then he's going to be able to go back and play for Mexico and do his things. It's not about, I think, Greg Berhalter, and you've characterized it well, it's not about convincing him that he needs to switch now. It's more about showing him what's going on. And there's a lot of different arguments for Efrain Alvarez about, you look at the turnover and sort of the roster composition between the 2 teams right now, between Mexico and the United States. And the United States has a bunch of young, up-and-coming players. They seem to be sort of changing the guard, and I know a lot of people are excited about the U.S. men's national team who watched them recently. You talked about them being undefeated, which is a feat in itself, even in a severely COVID-affected season, and basically only 4 games being played this year. That's all interesting. Mexico's in a little bit different spot with Tata Martino, and Kevin, you and I have talked about this, but still sort of sticking with the older guard and not necessarily going with younger kids. So, I mean, if Efrain Alvarez was going to make a decision on this, he would have probably more competition on the U.S. side of things, but at least in the short-term little bubble that we're looking at right now, perhaps the United States has more of an upside in the next couple of years, and so to be part of that team means that you could be part of a very successful team in the United States. And with Mexico, you'd probably get to play now, and you could sort of just be a staple on that roster if you're Efrain Alvarez. He still has to obviously prove, Kevin, that he can play, and I would think that there are a lot of Galaxy fans, and myself included, that are questioning whether or not he can play at this upper, adult level in Major League Soccer, and then that goes for the national teams as well. But looking at Efrain, he certainly has something to prove in this U.S. camp, and then he'll have something to prove with the LA Galaxy next year. And then Julian Arago, you talked about it. He didn't get to play whenever Berhalter called him up last time. Remember, there were a whole bunch of family members that came down for that game. It would have been perfect. Would have been the perfect sort of showcase for him to be able to play. And because he didn't play, Kevin, we know that he had a chip on his shoulder. And that chip on the shoulder really did sort of lead to, I think, some of his breakthrough this year and his ability to be as good as he was. He's playing as the underdog. So I guess maybe if you're a Galaxy fan, you hope maybe Greg Berhalter doesn't play him again. But it seems likely that that Julian Araujo is going to get time in this game and get that first cap for the U.S. It doesn't cap tie him, but it would put his name, in sort of the U.S. soccer column for at least a temporary little time. But as you said, Mexico and the United States still sort of fighting, or at least bargaining with these two to see who will get who.
Well, Mexico is a ticking time bomb. You may know that they're now ranked in the top 10 in the world by FIFA. They're number 9 in the world, but they had one of the older rosters of all the teams at the World Cup in Russia, the World Cup the U.S. did not go to. They had a very old roster. They tried to bring in some young players after that, in between the coaching changes, after Osorio left and before Tato Martino was hired. They brought up a lot of young players. Under Tato Martino, the team has been extremely successful, but mainly playing the old guard. They have, I think, 7 players under 30 on the last roster they called up. So at some point, and it looks like Tato Martino is going to continue to go with this old group, perhaps through Qatar. At some point, they're going to need young players like Alvarez and like Araujo to rebuild this team. Do those two guys want to wait that long? They could play for Mexico, perhaps in Tokyo. Mexico typically has a very good youth national team. They won the Olympic gold medal in 2012 in London. But that's kind of the thing. Do they want to wait for the Mexican national team to start rebuilding? It could be, when they begin that rebuilding, they'll be starting from scratch, perhaps, and it could be a really, really awful time to be playing for Mexico. The team could be really poor. Whereas, as you said, they're going to the United States to compete for a job with some great players who are playing in Europe. So those guys have some decisions to make. As you said, once Efrain Alvarez files his one-time change of affiliation, that's it. He's stuck with you can't. There's no go backs on that. Araujo might be able to maybe have a little bit more leeway, but once these guys make the decision, it's kind of done on the senior national level. So this is a good chance for the U.S. to look at them and see if they fit in, and then for those guys to decide what they want to do too. Julian has told me, we've had this discussion before, he's proud to be American, proud to be born here, the patriotic, all that kind of stuff, but he also feels an affinity to his parents' homeland. And he said it basically comes down to who wants me more. I can go to either side. I don't have a problem playing for either side. Whichever side makes me feel like I'm wanted, that's where I'm going to go.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, these kids are young. I can't imagine having a head on my shoulders to be able to make sort of these decisions that affect the rest of your life. At 18 and 19 years old, that was something that I was not mature enough for, and it was sort of shown in my ability to not understand some of the physical gifts you had at that age to be able to go and play sports and make it possibly a career in a bunch of different ways. So, it's a lot of pressure. It also means for both of these players that the 2021 season, that of which we don't really understand how it's going to work out and sort of what limitations are going to be put on it. And MLS, I believe, has sort of indicated already that the 2020 salary cap is going to stay the same in 2021, that won't move. It'll stay the same. There's been talk about the league starting in March, but I think it's even too early to tell if that's really something. So all of these things, and then roster congestion, game congestions, all of the games that are going to get played, and I know Dennis DeClosa talked about this whenever he had his postseason press conference, and possibly even on the interview that he was on our show as well. that he talks about just the schedule congestion that's going to happen because you have all these international games, you have the Olympics, you have all of these competitions that were delayed that are now going to want to be picked back up in a hopefully post-COVID era, or at least a getting better away from COVID time. So you look at all of these things that could affect the LA Galaxy and the roster, and Julian Araujo and Efrain Alvarez and Sebastian Lletget are going to be people who are, have significant roles on this team. Certainly Araujo and Lletget, and we'll see about Efrain. But looking at all those things, these competitions are going to have an effect, and then that if they're gone for these competitions, Kevin, you're going to have holes on the roster the LA Galaxy are going to have to be prepared for.
Yeah, and I think you see that with the actions that they made today with the roster moves. Some of the players they are continue to negotiate with, some of the players that they pick the options up on. It does look a lot like last year's team, which is not necessarily a good thing, but it also shows that there are some players who maybe the second string players who got some valuable playing time, prove that they can maybe handle a little bit more step up in playing time next year, because as you mentioned, there's going to be a lot of holes to fill at a lot of different times during the year. Guys going away to, as you said, Olympics, the Gold Cup, Nations League. This affects both the U.S. and Mexico, and some of the South American qualifiers could, affect people like Rolf Felcher if he stays and goes down and plays for Venezuela. So I think that the Galaxy roster construction definitely is going to take into account the fact that there's going to be guys missing for multiple periods of time, at many different times during the year.
Right. No, it is something you have to watch. Now let's get to I should probably warn everybody too. We're in off-season mode, so depending on how much information and news there is, depending on how talkative Kevin and I are, or any of the podcasts that sort of come in the off-season, they can be short, they can be longer, they're sort of in between. And so if you're expecting a full hour, sometimes it won't always hit that. Sometimes it'll only be a half hour. So just giving everybody a warning as we're in the off-season. Yes, Kevin.
I think we're kind of done now.
Yeah, you would think that. You would think that almost. I know we wanted to talk a little bit about not only the playoff games that are going on, but just some of the matchups that are going, and how MLS basically had to move a whole bunch of playoff games because the NFL shuffled and moved a whole bunch of playoff games as well. It still feels like 2020 is not quite done with everybody yet.
Yeah, well, they have moved the second playoff game, the MLS Western Conference. I'm trying to get this right. The Western Conference semifinal, which was supposed to be Wednesday. That's the Sporting Kansas City game. Sporting Kansas City, Minnesota United, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, they have moved that game. It was going to be played Wednesday, but the NFL had to move a game. Its Thursday night game had to be moved, and Fox was going to show that obviously in prime time, and they had 4 or 5 hours set aside in their prime time lineup to show sports, and they didn't have a football game. So they went to MLS and said, your game is on Fox Deportes. How would you like to move it over to Big Fox, have it be on network TV and a network television audience on a Thursday night? MLS obviously jumped at that offer. So they moved that game now. People tuning in for Thursday night football will now get a different kind of football. But that also forced MLS to make one other change, because that game's going to be played on Thursday and the conference final was scheduled for Sunday.
Right.
There wouldn't be enough time in between games for whichever team won that for them to rest up and get ready for the conference final. So the conference final has been moved from Sunday to Monday. Now, that might have happened anyways, because if Kansas City loses to Minnesota and Seattle beats FC Dallas, Seattle has the home game. They would play the conference final at home. They can't play it Sunday. Why? Because the NFL, the Seattle Seahawks, have the stadium on Sunday. So if Seattle winds up posting that game, it would have moved to Monday anyways. MLS just stepped in and said, let's just get it done now. We're going to move it. Basically, to wrap all this up, Kansas City and Minnesota get one extra day to prepare. They get to play on national TV, and then the conference final is on Monday.
Yeah, well, the other interesting part about this is we wanted to talk about matchups, but in the Eastern Conference semifinal, where you have Columbus and New England, right? That's the conference final. I should have said the Eastern Conference final is that Columbus versus New England. This is Caleb Porter, who was going, who seemed like he was minutes away from being the LA Galaxy.
And now, how do we know that? What was the sign? You remember?
Because he went to the Lakers game, right?
That's right. That's courtside at the Lakers game. That's kind of like the smoke at the Vatican chimney. To know a decision has been made when the entire brass, Chris Klein, Dennis DeClosa, and Dan Beckerman, take a coaching candidate to the Laker game and they sit courtside. That means that guy has been hired.
Yeah. So Caleb Porter, and if you remember, whenever we saw that and we started asking questions, everybody was pretty optimistic that this was going to get done. That Caleb Porter was going to be the next LA Galaxy head coach, and for whatever reason, whether Porter was playing Columbus off of LA, whether it was about an extra year, I've never quite nailed down the exact specific details. That's certainly what people will tell you if you discuss it. With fans who've been paying attention. Whether or not that's true is something that we've never really been able to confirm. But Caleb Porter ended up not becoming the LA Galaxy head coach. Guillermo Barros-Schelotto did, and the Columbus Crew got Caleb Porter. So now you have Caleb Porter against the New England Revolution, who just happened to be, Kevin, coached and managed by one Bruce Arena, who I think everybody is familiar with.
On the Porter thing, talking about why he didn't get the job, as you said, there's all kinds of talks about why he didn't get it. And, he was the college roommate of Chris Klein, which is, I think, one reason a lot of people in Galaxy land were kind of pushing for him. He and Chris Klein go all the way back to their college days at Indiana, where they were roommates. A couple of things I heard kind of dovetail with what you heard, that he wanted a longer term contract. I believe the Galaxy were offering 2 or 3, and he wanted 3 or 4. He wanted one more year that they were offering. Galaxy didn't want to do that because at the time they were still paying Ziggy Schmidt and Kurt Analfo not to manage the team. And they didn't want to get into a situation where if they had to let Porter go after a year or two, they have to pay him for not managing the team. They didn't want to wind up having to pay 3 managers not to manage the team. So that was one strike against him. The other thing that I heard too is that a lot of the Porter talk happened before Dennis DeClosa was hired as general manager. When he came in, he definitely wanted Schelotto. That was his guy all along. Didn't feel comfortable with Porter. Didn't feel like they were on the same page. And then once Schelotto became, he was sort of the backup candidate. Once Schelotto became available, that's where they went. And so that's the talk I hear. But the interesting thing with this matchup, Bruce Arena, when he came to the Galaxy, he came in mid-season with a team that was doing very poorly. The next year he had them in the MLS Cup final. That was 2008 he came in. 2009 he took this losing team to the MLS Cup final. He's done the exact same thing in New England. Remember, a team that has never won an MLS Cup final. He came in last year in May. The team was doing poorly. He was able to sort of put them together with duct tape and staples and got them into the playoffs. They didn't go very far. This year, he's now 1 win away from an MLS Cup final again. It's just, it's kind of amazing how it seems to be the exact same scenario he had here.
Well, and it also goes back to whenever the LA Galaxy were having all the problems after Ziggy Schmidt and before they hired Guillermo Barros-Schelotto, there were rumors that Bruce Arena was being mentioned for the LA Galaxy job. I think to characterize it as there was interest certainly from Arena to do that, and I don't think there was much interest for the LA Galaxy to entertain that idea. If I'm mischaracterizing that, Kevin, you and I have had this discussion many times, but I think that feels like the correct characterization of what was going on at the time.
Well, his name was dropped, and I actually heard from both sides, don't repeat this rumor. It's not true. I do, but subsequent investigation sort of found out, that the conversations were had, that Bruce had offered to help. It was unclear what kind of help he meant. Did he mean he was going to help coach the team? Did he mean he was going to help find a new coach, general manager? But there were discussions, and Bruce felt rebuffed at one point. He felt like the Galaxy were just sort of saying, yeah, whatever you want, thanks for the call, and they weren't really taking it seriously. And he felt like with all that he had accomplished there, that he should be taken a little bit more seriously and shown some respect. So there was some talk there. I don't know how serious it was on the Galaxy side. I think Bruce was sincere. I know when he was unemployed after he left the U.S. national team, I know that he was bored out of his mind. We had a lot of talks, Bruce and I did. And so I believe that he was sincere in wanting to do something, anything, to get back into soccer, and didn't feel like the Galaxy took him seriously. And so now here he is in the playoffs again, again, 1 win shy of an MLS Cup. And I'm sure he's hoping the Galaxy are watching closely.
Yeah, I'm sure there's no love lost between that. It also goes back to, one of the big criticisms when Bruce Arena's name was mentioned was, no, you can't do this. And by the way, Dominic Kinnear also falls under this criticism all the time, is no, this is MLS 3.0. You can't have an MLS 1.0 coach, going in there. You can't have an American coach. You need an international coach. And it's frustrating, Kevin. You and I have been covering this league for a long time. We see these trends, we see these things happen, but most of the time it feels like it's more PR than actual substance, right? Because this year everybody was on Philadelphia talking about how they do it right with young players and their young core and all these things, and they get knocked out in the first round of the playoffs. You can talk about Oscar Pereja, who did a great job with Orlando City, but when he was with FC Dallas, everybody was like, Dallas does it right. They're able to, put together good teams with young players, and it doesn't cost a lot, and that's how you're supposed to do it, except that they never won an MLS Cup with him. You had Atlanta, who came in with, Tata Martino, and you had LAFC as well, and you have these expansion teams that come in and spend big and understand that the extra money that they're getting from Major League Soccer is putting them at a severe advantage, it feels like, in these short periods of time. But what have we seen after that is you see a retraction. Whenever things start to be equal again, guess what? The teams start to be equal again. So seeing Bruce Arena labeled as MLS 1.0, seeing, quite honestly, Caleb Porter kind of fits more into like MLS 2.0, but still people would say that, time has passed him by and it's time to go. Those types of things. You have Peter Vermees in there, who is an MLS 1.0 guy, but does everything that 2.0 and 3.0 do, and is just extremely successful. The argument that you have to have an international coach or you have to have a quote-unquote MLS 3.0 coach is ridiculous, and none of the results have sort of proven that out. What you have seen is that good coaches are good coaches. And so I think it's wise to keep that in mind as the LA Galaxy go through their interview process. Certainly international coaches will be on that list, and I believe domestic coaches are going to be on that list as well. So that's my rant that has been stewing ever since, no shows over Thanksgiving.
Ziggy and I had a long talk shortly after he was let go, and Ziggy was pretty upset, as you might imagine. And one of the things he talked about is he said, he's been around soccer forever, with his dad and stuff. He goes back to the 50s, early 60s, to the start of AYSO, even before that. Anyway, the point is, he was telling me the same kind of thing that you're talking about, how all these new young coaches come along and all these new bright ideas. And he was showing me some soccer books that he had from the 50s, where they were talking about the same kind of formational and strategic and tactical things that everyone's talking about, being the new wave of soccer. He said people were doing this in the 50s. It just had different names, and the players weren't as skilled, so it might not have looked the same, but it was tactically and strategically the same. And he thought that people like him and Bruce and even Bob Bradley did not get the credit they deserved, that people thought they were dinosaurs, when in fact, as you said, they were successful and they knew how to win. It's really interesting. You look at, say, the way that LAFC plays, or the way Atlanta used to play under Tata Martino, with the high press and the short passing game and possession game and all that kind of stuff. And it looks good and it's fun to watch, and it oftentimes is successful. When you think of the Bruce Arena teams, I don't think of them having that kind of really attractive playing style. But you know what? You look at the end of the year and you look at the records, and the team always wins. And I think sometimes Bruce almost gets penalized because his teams are so good and so workmanlike and so blue collar. All they do is win. They don't run up a lot of high goal score. There's not Carlos Vela scoring 34 goals or a Zlatan with 30. They don't do a lot of those things that grab your attention. All they do is win, and that's what it's supposed to be about.
I would argue that Tiki Taco in 2012 and 2014 was an attractive style of soccer. They pass people to death, and I think that would. But I mean, I don't disagree with you that Bruce, whether or not they have always the best team. His teams tend to show up at the end, and quite honestly, for Galaxy fans, that's what you should want right now. Is you need somebody in there who is a stabilizing force, who can motivate players, who can coach up the players that are not top quality MLS talent or international level talent, that can still make and have an effect on the team on the field. And Arena was good at that. It feels like Dominic Kinnear is good with that as well. Now, when we talk about rumors surrounding Dominic Kinnear, before we go too far, I can give you some information. If you follow me on Twitter or you're on our Discord, you already know this information. I've already put it out to you. But I spoke with somebody with intimate knowledge of the negotiations going on, and there was a rumor out there that Dominic Kinnear had been offered the job. That's not true. He has not been offered the job. As a matter of fact, I know that some of the key players weren't even in the country whenever that rumor was out there, that some people were out of the country and therefore not in a position even to be making offers or doing anything. They were on vacation, basically, and it feels like they were out away for a couple days, over the Thanksgiving holiday. We're going to come back. The LA Galaxy have interviews set up for this week. And they have interviews apparently set up for next week as well. Who those names are, I don't know. I would imagine, as I said before, there were international coaches that were going to be on there. I imagine that Dominic Kinnear is going to be on there as well. I'm not saying Dominic Kinnear won't end up getting the job. None of that's. But what I'm telling you is it has not been offered to him. He is not making a decision right now. The LA Galaxy are going through interviews, and whenever those interviews have concluded and they feel like they have their selection, they're going to make a decision. So, Kevin, I think you and I were talking about how we understand the LA Galaxy are going to take their time on this. Mostly because it doesn't really. I say they're kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't. Which is, if they selected Dominic Kinnear right now, people would criticize them for not searching, far and wide for all those things. If they search far and wide and still come back to Dominic Kinnear, or they go somewhere else, they're going to get criticism for taking too long and sort of going, in all these different directions, when they probably had somebody who can do the job in Dominic Kinnear. My money right now is still on him, but certainly Greg Vanney is a name that is now continuing to pop up on a regular basis. And so the coach of Toronto FC, whether or not he will remain the coach of Toronto FC is certainly all up for discussion, and has a Galaxy connection, certainly. So Vanney could be one of those guys as well. And then, we've talked about a bunch of the international options as well. So those interviews should be going on this week and next week to give you a better idea of what's going on with the LA Galaxy and their coaching search.
But there is one time element to this, perhaps. DC United, apparently, they fired their coach a long time ago, and so they've been they're a little bit ahead of the Galaxy on the interview process. And I have heard that Dominic Kinnear was one person that they were thinking of too. Now, if Dom were to become a serious candidate there, that might sort of crunch the Galaxy timeline a little bit if they had to make a choice or risk losing Dom. Would they then offer him the job then, or would they just say, okay, that's one name that we're not going to consider anymore?
Yeah, definitely. It's something. So yeah, you can watch DC United. It's an interesting process. There will be more information as things get closer. I can tell you that right now. It feels like that, the LA Galaxy sort of want to stay on top of this and get somebody done, and they need to, because as we know today, Kevin, roster decisions were announced. MLS put in an 11:30 deadline, basically, so the day we're recording, November 30th, to make bona fide offers or exercise or decline options on players. Now, we had given you some indication of who some of those people were, but we didn't know 100% all of the contract information, and so now we have that contract information. So I'm going to go down the list, Kevin, and then we can sort of summarize and tell you why it seems like maybe things haven't changed all that much, but it still could change significantly or could not change significantly as we go forward. Let's start with Jonathan Dos Santos. He is under contract for 2021, so he will be coming back. Christian Pavone, everybody knows about. His loan has ended, and the LA Galaxy are continuing negotiations with Boca Juniors on that. His fate was never expected today, and you should be looking at that probably in the next 30 days or so for anything to really happen. Chicharito is under contract in 2021. Here's the first bit of actual information that we have for this offseason is that Sacha Kljestan signed a new contract for the 2021 season. We have no idea how much money he was making last year, so I can't tell you if he took a pay cut. I can't tell you if it makes sense. I can't tell you any of those things because we don't know how much money Sacha Kljestan has made on that one, Kevin. We can pause here and at least reflect on Sacha Kljestan for a second. I think you and I would have the opinion that keeping Sasha Kljestan on this team to be in the locker room and to be able to provide some late game minutes and some control for the LA Galaxy in the midfield is probably a good deal, depending on how much money it is. If they paid him $2 million, which they didn't because they would have to announce that it was a larger contract, although the deal of the actual terms of the contract are not even finalized. They're expecting league approval on it. But having Sasha Kljestan on your team and in your locker room is probably an overall bonus.
And that's, I think, why they're bringing him back. And he's motivated to be here. I mean, I don't know what he made last year, and we should explain. Generally, the Players Union, twice a year, at the beginning of the summer, at the end of the summer, they list all the players' salaries, what they're due to make. But this year, with COVID, with so many players taking, percentage pay cut to sort of help the league balance the books, the union has not released any salary information. So we're flying blind. We don't know what anyone's making. And going back to see what Sasha made, previous MLS clubs in previous years would have nothing to do with what the Galaxy agreed to pay him. I think he's probably pretty motivated. If they offered him, not an embarrassing cut, but if they ask him to take a little bit of a pay cut, I think at this stage of his career, he probably would do that. He wants to stay home in Southern California. His family, loves it here. And also, I think he believes in what the Galaxy is trying to do. He is as you mentioned, a very important part of this team. He is the guy. He's the wizened veteran in the locker room. That people are going to go and turn to. He's the Roy Kent of the Galaxy, is maybe another way to put it.
Right.
And that was extremely important this year with all the things that went on. People look at his production on the field and say, well, maybe, it wasn't a good year for him. You know what? It was a great year for him because he kept the Galaxy together through the MLS's back, through the Black Lives Matter protest, through the 4 months off. And I think he probably wants to come back and get a shot at maybe a 34-game season without interruption.
Yeah, it's and maybe not so condensed, although I think the schedule still will end up being a little condensed. It was rumored that Kljestan took a considerable pay cut to come to the Galaxy last year. So I was arguing even in our Discord, somebody said, well, he better have taken a 50% pay cut. I'm like, one, you don't know how much money he was actually making last year, so saying that is probably ridiculous. Technically speaking, he could have gotten a raise, and then that threw everybody off. And I said, well, if he was making $104,000 and you're going to pay him $105,000 this year, that would be a raise. It's still reasonable. Again, the numbers matter, but we never get the actual numbers unless the Players Union puts them out for us. And if you don't know the numbers, then you can't make really good decisions on this. Having said that, this feels like Sasha Kljestan isn't costing the LA Galaxy that much money. It feels like he wants to stay and sort of retire and be done here in LA. And that means that he's motivated to play for the LA Galaxy. He wants to be here. He has said that. And certainly whenever I asked him after I think the last game about whether or not he was thinking about retiring and coming back, he said he had hoped he would be back and he'd given no thoughts of retiring. So this is Sasha Kljestan going. So Kljestan on the team for 2021. Let's go to Pipo Gonzalez, who is under contract for 2021. We can talk about that. Joe Corona, option declined, but still negotiating with the LA Galaxy. Perry Kitchen out of contract. His contract is up, and he is still negotiating with the LA Galaxy. David Bingham, goalkeeper, out of contract, but still negotiating with the LA Galaxy. Sebastian Lletget has a 2021 contract. Rolf Felcher is out of contract and still negotiating with the LA Galaxy, so possibly on a new contract. Daniel Steres has a 2021 contract. Danny Acosta, injured for all of this season, will be ready, it seems like, for the 2021 season, is under a 2021 contract, so he will be back. Julian Araujo is under a 2021 contract. The LA Galaxy went out and exercised the option of Ethan Zubak, so he will be on the roster in 2021. Efrain Alvarez is on a 2021 contract. Emil Cuello is our first option declined. Emil Cuello will not be back with the LA Galaxy. They are not negotiating with him. At least they didn't say that they were negotiating. So it's likely you've seen your last of Emil Cuello on the LA Galaxy senior team. Justin Vom Steeg option exercise. So they picked up Justin Vom Steeg's option. So the goalkeeping position very much up for grabs. Vom Steeg seems like a capable backup. I think also signed with a new agent as well. So the LA Galaxy picked up his options. Option exercised on Vom Steeg. Didi Traore had his option exercised. You had Emiliano Insua, who apparently had an option for this year. That option was declined by the LA Galaxy, but they're still negotiating with him. And then you have Eric Lopez, goalkeeper, is on a 2021 contract. Nick Depew, the LA Galaxy defender, is on a 2021 contract. Dunbar and Jonathan Perez, both on contracts as well for 2021. You get to Gordon Wilde, who everybody was going wild for in the first game of the season. The first couple games, I think, in the bubble is when Gordon Wilde sort of came out, but his option has been declined, so I don't think you're going to see the LA Galaxy, him in an LA Galaxy kit. Again, you had Kai Koreniuk option exercise, so they picked up his option, the young midfielder. You had Carlos Harvey. His loan has ended there, Kevin, but the LA Galaxy are negotiating with Taro FC. Taro FC actually loaned him to LA Galaxy 2, and then LA Galaxy 2 loaned him up to LA Galaxy, so they'll have to negotiate there. Yanni Gonzalez, his option was declined. That's interesting. We'll talk about that one. And then Jonathan Klinsmann, option declined, but still negotiating. So that's where we sit. Let's talk about some of the interesting ones here, Kevin. As of right now, there were 28 players on the roster before this started, and now you had 3 option declines in this list. Only 3. So Cuello, you had Gordon Wilde, and you had Yanni Gonzalez option declined. Those are the only ones option declined, and they're not negotiating with anymore. So really, you have 25 players, if you brought back everybody you're still negotiating with on this roster. Is there any surprises on this?
I'm a little bit surprised that they are talking to Felcher, but I do think that goes back because he was making over $200,000 the last time we saw a contract for him, and he took a pay cut down to that. So his first year he was making even more. That seems like a kind of a pricey thing if you've decided that Araujo may be your outside back. But again, I think it goes back to both that they're negotiating with him to see perhaps if they can get him to take a slightly less expensive deal. But, the Zubak thing, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier. There's a guy who played a lot of games this year, played a lot of minutes. He only scored 2 goals, but I think he did enough to impress the coaching staff or the front office that remains. And to say that he's a guy that can take some minutes and fill, play some games when people are missing. And again, we talked about how Sebastian Lletget's going to be gone, and maybe Chicharito might get a call up, and Pavone could get a call up if he comes back. So they're going to need guys to take those minutes, and I think they saw enough from Zubek to know that he's a guy that they want to have around. Some of the guys are still talking to. We don't know what they're talking about. Bingham had probably his worst year as a pro. He had his highest goals against average of his career, 1.94. He's over 30 now. I'm not so sure what they're talking to him about. Perhaps they don't have any other options at goalkeeper. It'd be interesting to see what those conversations are about. Are they just sort of leading those guys on until they can find a replacement? Is there serious talk? Are they really interested? And then there's one guy that you didn't even mention that we still believe he's under contract.
Yeah, Jorgen Shelvik, who is away on loan. Was he in Sweden? Is that where he's at? He's with Hammarby, isn't he? Is that what I remember? I'm gonna have to look it up now. It's literally been so not in my. I have it. I have him.
He's in Scandinavia.
Is that where? So he's gone now. I asked the question today because it's just weird that he's not listed on this, because even if he's a loan, he's technically an LA Galaxy player until that loan is up and either his contract is out, and he would be listed as out of contract basically. Whenever it goes, but he's not listed on there. So,
and what happened to João Pedro? Yeah, is he now out of contract as well?
He was out of contract. I think he was out of contract last year, and so he was out of contract, and so then he could go sign with whoever he wanted to go to. But yes, but for Jorgen Shelvik, it seems that at least from preliminary information, and we're trying to wade around and look through the soup here whenever it comes to MLS and these roster rules, and just sort of the obfuscation that comes from the teams in Major League Soccer and the league trying to make sure you don't get a good idea of what's going on. But Jorgen Shelvik is under contract from what I understand. He's just not on the LA Galaxy roster because he's loaned out, and that loan is probably for a certain amount of time. It could even be for multiple years. And so therefore he is, but technically speaking, he's on the roster, which means, Kevin, if I get this correct, and I'll do my best, he was on a 5-year deal the LA Galaxy signed Jorgen Shelvik. Whenever this was funny, I was filling in for you at the LA Times when this one broke. So I was actually the one who broke the news that the LA Galaxy had signed Jorgen Shelvik for the LA Times. So I remember this one pretty specifically, which is the LA Galaxy signed Jorgen Shelvik. So that's what it feels like a 5-year deal. Like they signed him to a 5-year deal, which seems the only other player I've ever heard of signing a 5-year deal off the top of my head with no extensions, Jonathan Dos Santos. Is that did Giovanni Dos Santos sign 5 years?
No, I don't believe he did. And Jonathan's contract was different in that they were picking up an existing contract and extending it. So, in a sense, I believe the Galaxy only actually gave Jonathan 3 years, which is about a typical term of a MLS contract. But because he'd already had, I believe he had 2 years left on his La Liga contract at that time, and then they extended it to get the deal done. So that one, a little bit of extenuating circumstance. I don't know that Jorgen Shelvik had that kind of deal when he came over from Europe. But yeah, I mean, especially for what they got. I mean, this was a guy who I thought came here. He came with a pretty good resume, and he looked like he was going to be a solid player. But, I think when Europeans come into the U.S., they need to sort of get accustomed to playing here and in a sense prove that they can handle the travel and some of the other complications of MLS. That's why you don't see the long contracts, even for European players, because it is such a it's such a roll of the dice whether they're going to be able to adjust. So if they gave someone like Jorgen Shelvik 5 years, that's malpractice, I think, in my book. Somebody should pay for that.
Yeah, you would think. Pipo Gonzalez being under contract, I think, hurts the LA Galaxy, although I think he was improved in the 1 week under Dominic Kinnear. So that's something. Joe Corona, Perry Kitchen, David Bingham. I feel like the LA Galaxy...
I like Perry. I like Kitchen. Kitchen played 21 games this year. I thought he was solid.
Yeah. I mean, and listen, I'd say the same. I think Corona and Kitchen seem like they're kind of... Kitchen may rely on who the coach is, right? If it's Dominic Kinnear, I think Perry Kitchen can come back. I think that goes with Bingham as well, is if it's Dominic Kinnear and he's the head coach, can he get Bingham for a reduced salary? Basically we show Bingham's 2019 salary at $375,000. It's a lot of money for a goalkeeper. Depending on what Dominic Kinnear brings to the table and sort of what negotiating power he has with David Bingham, if you can get that down, and I don't know what a good number is, but 220, 250 seems like a more reasonable number for what Bingham has brought to the LA Galaxy. Maybe he stays, and maybe Bingham doesn't stay regardless. Maybe the LA Galaxy, move on. Maybe it's a Jonathan Klinsmann sort of deal, and Klinsmann, I think, is going to sort of be one of those guys that they're going to try to negotiate with and sort of pull together as well. So when you look at the changes, or at least the players that they are keeping, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. 17 of 28 players are coming back in 2021. So, and I would imagine with the ones they're still negotiating with, I would imagine Insua comes back. That seems like a no-brainer to me. I thought Insua was solid enough to bring back. Now, it may be that his option was, a whole bunch of money, and so they don't want to pay a whole bunch of money. Instead, they want to negotiate that deal down a little bit, or they want to change the terms, or they want to lock it up for longer. There's a whole bunch of reasons why they would decline the option but still negotiate, and that goes with all of these guys. Now, I'll caution everybody, and I think if everybody remembers last offseason as well, Kevin, is that still negotiating does not mean that there's going to be a deal done, because the LA Galaxy were still negotiating with Ramon Alessandrini last year whenever, the options came out and basically he was out of contract, and the LA Galaxy were like, well, we're still negotiating with him, and that never came. We knew after about 2 or 3 weeks that was never going to happen. It was going to come forward. So sort of keep that in your mind as you look at this. But if you were looking for wholesale changes, and I told you that 17 of 28 players were coming back, that's probably not something that you would jump up and down about. I know there are players on this team that people disagree with, and some of them they're still negotiating with, and you have to understand sort of what it is. But without numbers, Kevin, I can't give you a great that this makes sense or that doesn't make sense. So it puts us in a bad sort of situation to try to evaluate what the LA Galaxy are trying to do here.
Well, I think what happens is when you talk about they're continuing to negotiate, that just basically means you're sort of keeping the players close at hand and letting them know that you're interested, as they did with Roman, just to see how things would break. The one thing you don't want to do is tell a player, look, you're not in our plans. we're not interested in you. No, we're not going to talk to you anymore. And then 2 weeks later, there's an injury and you have to come back to the guy and say, hey, we really need you. That's just awkward all the way around, and it's not going to make for a good negotiation. You're right on the Bingham thing. It's very interesting. I think David Bingham, I think he really was. He was a very good goalkeeper early in his time at San Jose, and that was when he played for Dominic Kinnear. So when you talk about Bingham, it could be one of those situations where where Dominic comes over and says, look, I know he had a bad season. There were a lot of things going on. I think he still got it. I think I can work with him. I saw him when he was good. I know, how to help him. And that might be one of those situations where Dominic has said, let's keep talking to him. If I get the job, I think I can make this work. Or it could just be, they don't have any other options at goalkeeper yet. It's interesting you talk about Jonathan Klinsmann. He may turn out to be a pretty good goalkeeper. We saw some flashes of brilliance in the 4 games he played. We also saw some, really awful mistakes. So we don't know what we've got there. But it's difficult to have a young goalkeeper and make him your guy early. We saw that with Clement Diop. If you remember when Kurtanov was here and he benched Brian Rowe and made Diop the goalkeeper, he was a young guy that was still kind of feeling his way, and he had some really awful moments. But you look at what he's done in Montreal this season, and he's turned into a pretty decent goalkeeper. The Galaxy just leaned on him too heavy too early, I think. We may be having a totally different conversation about Jonathan Klinsmann in 3 or 4 years. He may be, one of the better goalkeepers in MLS. We don't know that yet, but it might not be a good idea to turn your team over to him at this point without having at least some idea of a backup or a plan B, because if the Galaxy really want to compete, this should not be the place where you're, having goalkeeper 101 for a couple seasons.
Yeah, it's it's certainly something you have to pay attention to.
And when I look at this list of players that they are still talking to, whether it's negotiations or players they brought back or whatever, obviously Pavone, everyone would agree that that's the number one on the to-do list. Got to get that guy back. Second, I agree with you. I think Insua, I thought he was solid. You never had to think about left back. There were other positions that you had to think about a little bit. You never had to think about what was going on at left back.
He played every game, Kevin, every game of the season.
Second on the team in minutes. He wasn't flashy. Didn't score a lot of goals. I don't even know did he even have a shot on goal? I probably had a shot on goal, but he wasn't a guy that you noticed, and that's exactly, I think, what you want from your back line. You don't notice the guys are there. They're just solid. They get everything done. They don't make huge mistakes. They do what they're supposed to do. They stay where they're supposed to be. I thought he was a good player, and especially if you're going to have Dupuis next to him, a young center back, that's the kind of guy that he can learn from. I think that he, after Pavone, I think Insua would be my number 2 guy on the list of guys I want to bring back.
Yeah, he had 2 shots, 2 assists, no shots on goal for Emiliano Insua. No, it's one of those. It's funny because you were talking about Clement Diop and Brian Rowe, both of who were playing in the playoffs. Brian Rowe was with Orlando City and Diop was with Montreal. You also have Gyasi Zardes, who played right back for the LA Galaxy, if you remember, under Siggy Schmidt, which is always a fun, interesting little trivia thing, is out there breaking games open in extra time for the Columbus Crew.
And who's he going to play against this next week?
He's playing against Bruce Arena. That's right.
Bruce Arena is the guy who brought him to MLS. Bruce tells the story about going over to Gyasi Zardes' house and sitting in the living room with him and telling him, he was at UC Santa Barbara, telling him he really needed to be in MLS and needed to come to the Galaxy Academy. And then Bruce sort of gave him, Gyasi had already played some for the national team when Bruce came along, but hadn't played well. And Bruce kind of, I think, basically restarted his career in some ways with the national team and made him feel more comfortable. The point is, I think Gyasi owes a lot of what he's accomplished to Bruce, and it's going to be interesting seeing Gyasi now trying to beat him in the Eastern Conference final.
Yeah, it's all. Hey, there's always Galaxy players. By the way, the team that the Columbus Crew beat, Nashville, had Dave Romney at center back and was part of one of the I think the best defense in Major League Soccer between Romney and Walker Zimmerman there. So There's Galaxy ties all over the place, and the players that haven't always worked out with the LA Galaxy have worked out in sometimes in other places, and sometimes they haven't. I mean, this is all rolling the dice, but the roster decisions are at least in for now. Eventually, there will be the MLS expansion draft that'll happen after MLS Cup, and all that stuff sort of draws to a close here. You have Seattle versus FC Dallas on the 1st, which is tomorrow. You have Sporting Kansas City versus Minnesota. You have Columbus versus New England all coming up. So 12-1, you have the Western Conference. 12-1 and 12-3 is Western Conference games. Seattle, FC Dallas, Sporting Kansas City, and Minnesota. The Sporting Kansas City and Minnesota game is fun because everybody's pointing at each other saying, no, we're the underdogs. There's a fight over who the underdogs are, with Peter Rivermees telling Minnesota that definitely Sporting is the underdog because Minnesota are the favorites, and Minnesota's like, wait, no, we're not. It's fun. That's the type of banter that you expect to see in the postseason. So
now, who's the top seed now remaining in the East? Is it Columbus, and is their record better than Seattle's?
Columbus is, I believe, the host of that. So I believe Columbus is the best team in the East.
Because Philadelphia and Toronto was out, and I thought Columbus was third. So
yeah.
But who has the better record, Seattle or Columbus?
That I don't know. I imagine. Let's see. I can find out. Don't worry. I got buttons for this. I can hit buttons and find out things. And
you always yell at me when I search the web on my computer. You say my buttons are too noisy.
Yes, well, that's what. See, I was able to search and find things and not make a whole bunch of noise.
I'm supposed to use my phone. That's what you told me.
Yes, that's what you're supposed to do. The fourth, they finished fourth. Columbus finished fourth in the overall standings, so they have a better record than Seattle.
They would, if it was Seattle against Columbus would host.
Yeah, yes, that is correct right now. I'm trying to look at the Columbus has one more win. They both played so Columbus played 23 games in Seattle, so you're looking at points per game, so 1.78 for Columbus and 1.77. Basically, the game Seattle couldn't play against the Rapids will end up meaning that Columbus will host if Seattle were to advance through that. Yeah, Columbus is going to be the host of, if they advance, will host MLS Cup.
That may be the worst. That might be the worst effect of this. Well, no, it's not the worst effect of the whole COVID thing, but the way MLS kind of bollocks this thing up.
Yes.
By what would be 1/100th of a point, they might wind up having to go to Columbus. And the reason I say that is because I was just going to ask you who you like. I really like Seattle. I think they're playing really well right now. They're at home against Dallas. If Kansas City loses, they would be at home for the conference final as well. They have not lost at home since 2015.
Right.
And they have been in 2 of the last 4 MLS Cups. I believe that's right. And I just think that they're right now probably the best and hottest team. I would never bet against a Bruce Arena team if it came down to, even if they played in Seattle, if it came down to New England, Seattle, I might go with Bruce just because I think it's silly to bet against Bruce. It would also be interesting if it came down to that too, because when Bruce coached the Galaxy in the 2009 MLS Cup, again, when he turned that team around and took it to the Cup final in his first full season, that game was played in Seattle. You might remember that was when they were still playing neutral turf games. That was the game that went to a shootout, and the Galaxy wound up losing. But if Seattle were to host the final and Bruce Arena would go play there, he'd be returning to the same stadium where he played his first MLS Cup with the Galaxy.
Yeah, and lost. I was at that game. I remember that. Cold, rainy day for most of the day, and then into that.
It's Seattle, cold and rainy? No way.
Yeah, I know. Surprising. It didn't rain, at least during the game, from what I can remember. So we were somehow safe for that. But it was cold. I was very cold. Being from Southern California, that's cold, damp weather, and it's quite honestly, it's almost un-American weather as far as I'm concerned.
That was when it was Quest Field, right?
I believe it was. Yes.
And then it was CenturyLink, and now it's Luton Field.
Wait, they just changed it again?
Yes, there's a new name.
I can't keep track of all these. It's hard enough trying to remember Home Depot Center, StubHub Center, Dignity Health Sports Park.
I get that wrong all the time.
Yeah, and now they'll change it here in another year or something, and we'll have to change it again, and we will have just gotten used to Dignity Health Sports Park. So there's no one. I'm not smart enough to remember that stuff. So whenever we're going through all this, it's just another sort of mark against me. All right, I think that's it. As of right now, we're planning on having a show on Thursday, so you can sort of keep that in your back pocket. We were planning to have one the last Thursday before sort of the holiday week, and that didn't work out. So sort of understand that it may be one show a week. maybe 2. We'll sort of keep it going. If there's stuff to talk about and we can have a wonderful live show and we can do stuff, then we're going to do that. And if not, then we're not going to do it because it's not worth just, exercising my jaw for an hour if there's not really important stuff to talk about with the LA Galaxy. Usually we can find some really important stuff to talk about. All right. Anything else? Yes?
Yes, I said Luton Field. It's Lumen Field.
Lumen. Oh,
I got one letter wrong.
As in light, as in lumens.
Lumen, yes. Okay. Lumen Field. I think my favorite was Century Field, although Quest sounded kind of cool. Century Link, because it was one word with a capital letter in the middle. That was kind of cool.
You like that. I'm trying to think of what my favorite one of all of the... No, I don't have one. They just, they all mix together and I get confused. That's really where it's at. So,
well, do you like the corporate names? I mean, like Fenway Park. Well, Wrigley Field is, I guess, maybe the first corporate name, but, Yankee Stadium and Fenway Park and Dodger Stadium, those are kind of cool. It's not sold to the highest bidder. And then, like you said, you get in this situation where a new sponsor comes along every couple of years and it's like, where's the game?
Yeah,
where are we playing today?
You still have like Mile High Stadium, Mile High Stadium at, and then they put in some corporate name. So they're always
that's okay. I'll go along with that. That's fine.
Yeah, it just, unless the Galaxy are going to figure out a way to really name it. It's like it's Bruce Arena Field. Although Bruce Arena is always fun too. Bruce Arena Field. In the Siggy Schmidt stands, in the in the Landon Donovan section, you can start to sort of do that. I think my college baseball team, whenever they had one of their old fields, was like, this is the name of the stadium, then this is the name of the field, and this is the area, and it had like 3 names. So if you were really going for like the exact qualifier, so I guess you could kind of get into that as well. I tend not to care much about any of that stuff.
Well, the baseball field next to Lumen Field, it used to be Safeco Park. Now it's T-Mobile Park.
Now it's it's like meh, whatever. That's where does Seattle play? Where do the Mariners play? That's all. It sort of matters. I'm going to that stadium whenever it all says.
I mean, imagine if Manchester United changed Old Trafford to like. I don't know, Scone Stadium or something. That wouldn't work.
English breakfast tea. They don't call it breakfast tea. They don't call it English breakfast tea in England. I keep forgetting that. It's just breakfast.
But of course, half the stadiums in England now are either Emirates or Etihad or whatever it is.
Yeah, you can't even name. You can't even say your own stadium. Huh? Okay,
yeah.
I just want to make sure. All right, we're gonna get out of here. If you're looking for Mr. Kevin Baxter on Twitter, it's at KBaxter11. Head on over to LA Times for all of Kevin's soccer writing. Some U.S. men's national team stuff coming up, and certainly some focus on the LA Galaxy with 3 players going for that call up. So sort of keep an eye on that. LATimes.com and go read all of Kevin's wonderful stuff. If you're looking for me on Twitter, it's at Guesman, JGUESMAN, and of course at Galaxy Podcast. Head on over to cornerthegalaxy.com. We're keeping you updated, doing a whole bunch of stuff whenever it comes to the LA Galaxy in the offseason. There will be articles, there will be some updates, and so we'll get back into that as well. So a busy time for the LA Galaxy. A lot of things should be moving, coach searching going on as well. We'll keep you updated as best we can. For Kevin the Panda Baxter, I'm Josh Pato Guesman. You've been listening to Corner of the Galaxy from the Box on cornerofthegalaxy.com.
You've been listening to the Corner of the Galaxy podcast on cornerofthegalaxy.com. You can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Galaxy Podcast, and be sure to check out and subscribe to iTunes, Stitcher, and Facebook by searching for Corner of the Galaxy. Fans, we thank you for listening, and we ask that you be kind and courteous to your neighbors as you leave the podcast. We thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you again. Until then, I'm Michael Araujo, and on behalf of the entire Corner of the Galaxy crew, goodbye, everybody.